Hey, how's it going, guys? Akira here, and today we'll be doing my top 10 consoles of all time. Now, I did a video like this previously, and if you guys haven't watched that, please go ahead and watch that. But this one is handhelds included. So that one had my top 10 favorite game consoles, but no handhelds. Now, this one will have the handhelds included within that list, meaning that some of the lower placing consoles of that list, they will be bumped off the top 10, because then the handhelds would take up their space, their place in the top 10, regarding however many handhelds are in my top 10. So yeah, so last list was no handhelds included. This one is handhelds included. Now, same rules apply. For example, I'm not doing any relevant consoles currently, that the successor haven't come out. So, for example, as the time of this recording, the Switch is still the most relevant Nintendo console. The Switch 2, its successor, has not come out. Therefore, the Switch is not included in this list. Same thing with the PS5 and the Xbox Series X, as those are also, the most relevant consoles, and their successors have not come out yet. So yeah, so those are basically some of the ground rules. So no Switch included, no PS5, no Xbox Series X or S, and yeah, handhelds are included with this list. So yeah, without further ado, here are my top 10 game consoles, handhelds included. Up next, we have the original Xbox, right? So yeah, the reason why I'm showing you this, the box of the original Xbox, the Xbox is inside of it. And then my other Xbox, or OG Xbox, is in the living room, hooked up and all that stuff. But anyways, regardless, yeah, showing you the original Xbox. And yes, I am one of those weird ones that prefers the OG Xbox over the Xbox 360. And I will tell you now, there will be no more Xboxes on this list because, yeah, I think Xbox peaked at Xbox OG and Xbox 360, like I mentioned before. And yeah, Microsoft, ever since the Xbox One release with the whole Don Matrix situation, like I mentioned, they're like I said, they're there's nothing interesting to play or do in those consoles. To me, the interesting Xbox, the cool Xbox, the good Xbox was OG Xbox and Xbox 360. But yeah, anyways, moving on, talking about the original Xbox, right? Like I mentioned before with the Xbox 360, the OG Xbox and the 360 have some of the more interesting Xbox exclusives, right? They're very unique, they're very interesting. They're not the same copy and paste like we see during the Xbox One era and the Xbox Series X era, where it's just more Gears, more Halo, more Forza. So it's just Gears, Halo, Forza. Here's Halo, Forza. Rinse and repeat. During this era, we had Blinks. We had what was I know Panzer Dragoon Orta was Sega, but it was exclusive to the Xbox, right? We had I know Psychonauts was an exclusive for a while. Obviously we had Halo, we had Forza, we had stuff like Project Gotham Racing, right? Crimson Skies, Blinks 2, Otogi 2, and then I know stuff like Cameo and Viva Pinata, or the 360 era, and Crackdown. But it's still like, within this Xbox and Xbox 360 era, where this was just peak Xbox, and their exclusives were unique and interesting, and they were creative, right? That's the word I want to look for: creative and unique exclusives that it just made it desirable, right? Blinks and Cameo and Viva Pinata and Crimson Skies, they're unique, right? There's nothing like them, right? But then after that, it's just more Halo and Gears, right? But anyways, so yeah, that's the reason why I really like the OG Xbox a lot, and I prefer over 360, because I think the exclusives here are slightly more creative and unique over the 360. And for me, as I'm a fan of Sega, right, and I'm a fan of, like, the Dreamcast and the Saturn and the Genesis. This was basically Dreamcast 2.0. This console right here, when the Dreamcast failed, and stopped production, right? Sega, they still had a lot of unfinished games that were being developed for the Dreamcast. So they were just finished and they were just put on the Xbox. So this is basically your Dreamcast 2, right? We had continuations, like I said, of Panzer Dragoon. We had Crazy Taxi 3, which is continuation of the first two on Dreamcast. Shenmue 2, obviously the sequel to the first one on the Dreamcast. You had a bunch of the Sega games like Sega GT, right? Just continuing off the more legacy Sega stuff. That they were put on the OG Xbox, right? It literally just felt like a Dreamcast 2. On top of that, helps that Microsoft helped with the not the operating system. They put Windows on the Dreamcast so you can play online, on the Dreamcast, and obviously that carried over with to the original Xbox. So it literally felt like a 2.0 Dreamcast, which is with its own exclusives, like Halo and Blinks and all that kind of stuff. So it just felt like natural, like a natural progression. Like if you had a Dreamcast and you were sad that it failed and there were no more games for it, no more consoles being produced, you get an Xbox and it just feels like an upgraded from that, which is very cool, right? Along with, obviously, like I said, its own identity, and as that, obviously, Xbox Live revolutionized the online play, ever since, after that, there was a new standard, right? I didn't grow up with this console because I was way too young for this generation of, like, Dreamcast, Xbox, PS2, GameCube, right? And like I mentioned before, my childhood console was the Wii and the Xbox 360. So I grew up with the 7th generation because by then I was already old enough to, like, play games and understand what the heck I was doing. I feel like if during this era, if you would have given me like an Xbox or PS2 controller, I was still a little kid, so I probably would have, like, either put it in my mouth and chew on the buttons or just thrown it on the floor like little kids do. But yeah, regardless, yeah, I really like the OG Xbox. My favorite game for this is Super Monkey Ball Deluxe. Super Monkey Ball Deluxe is my favorite OG Xbox game. And I like the other ones like Panzer Dragoon Saga, Crazy Taxi 3, a lot of the Sega stuff. That's what really hits home for me in this. And Blinks, I really, really like Blinks. Blinks is a really cool platformer game. But yeah, OG Xbox. I know I'm the weird one to like it over the 360 and the other ones, but this is my pick for my top 10. All right, up next we have the original PlayStation. Now I'm showing you off. What I'm showing you guys is the PS1 Slim, because my original PlayStation is hooked up all the way up there. And I didn't want to, like, unplug it and mess with all the cables and stuff. So I was like, I'll just show you guys the PS1 Slim. But if you've never seen an original PlayStation, it's just like this, but like slightly bigger. But yeah, regardless, showing off the PS1 Slim, but anything, PS1, right? Yeah, I prefer it over the Super Nintendo. And I put it above over the Super Nintendo. It was a close battle, right? If we were to say what are the best consoles of the 90s, this and the Super Nintendo are definitely top two. I believe that would be the case for most people, right? Sega Genesis will be up there as well, so that would be like the triangle of top three, right? Genesis, SNES, and PS1. But wow, if you thought the SNES library was legendary, this guy showed up and said you haven't seen anything yet. This was a console to get in the late 90s. If you wanted to eat at the cool kids table, if you wanted to not get your $5 stolen and given wedgies in the locker room, this was a console you should get in the late 90s. The PS1. Obviously I wasn't there because I wasn't born when this console was around, but I'm just saying from what people tell me. But anyways, yeah, PS1. What else can I say that hasn't been said about the PS1? Sony, first time ever coming in, people were like, what the heck, Sony, you guys make the Walkman and CD players and TVs, like, what the heck are you guys doing making a console? That's like when all these other companies during the 90s, right, the fourth and fifth generation, they call them the graveyard generations, because that's when a lot of companies that had nothing to do with gaming wanted to make a game console and they all just died. So literally the 90s was just a bunch of dead consoles with like Nintendo and Sega just fighting at the top. And even old school veterans like Atari, they were like dead. They were piled up in like those like dead consoles, along with those random companies that wanted to make one that weren't do with gaming. So people thought that Sony was gonna be one of them, and no, guess what? It blew everything out of the water. No console at that time had reached 100 million units. The highest consoles before the PS1, the highest selling consoles was the NES. The NES at 60 million, the Super Nintendo at 49 million, the Genesis I believe at 39 million or 40 million, and then the Atari 2600 at 30 million, right? And then the PS1 says, nah, bruh, 100 million right here, dog. 102 million to be exact. But yeah, all the third parties, this is where all the third parties were at. Some were on the Saturn, but not really. None of them were on the N64. Everyone was here, dude. All the third parties were here. You know, great first party games like Twisted Metal, obviously, Ape Escape. This little guy right here, but unfortunately he's Japan only. Toro from Doko de Moisio. Medieval, excuse me, right? It stacks on Parappa the Rapper, Everybody's Golf for Hot Shots Golf, and just going on and on, and tons of first party games. The first party games, and then the third party games like Konami, obviously with Metal Gear and Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Square with Final Fantasy 7, 8, 9, and they were just going on a rampage of Final Fantasies, and then they went back and ported 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 on the PS1. Chrono Trigger, Chrono Cross, you name it, man. Every game was on this here. You want to play Tony Hawk is on here. You want to play I know at the time GTA wasn't that big, but like GTA 1 and 2, I know GTA 2 was pretty big, was somewhat notable here. Sports games, action games, RPGs, puzzle games, you name it, everything was in this console. And like I mentioned before, obviously I wasn't born when this console came out, but I experienced this console, through retrospect and going back and playing a lot of those games. And yeah, they're very good games. They're very fun. They haven't aged as well, because that era, like that Nintendo 64, PS1 era, it was early 3D, so they still feel, a bit clunky and stuff. But there's some kind of charm to it, right? That makes it feel like, I guess, off the time, off the era. But obviously, they haven't aged as well as, like, let's say 16-bit games, right? Like on Super Nintendo or Sega Genesis. But regardless, popping in Metal Gear Solid, Final Fantasy 7, it's still such a fun time. And I would definitely say this is one of those consoles that a lot of people have definitely put in their top 10. And it is in my top 10, right? I will say, though, I think just like Nintendo, I think Sony has gotten better since. I do think that as amazing as this console is, and as amazing as the NES is, I legit think every console after the NES is better than the NES, right? For Nintendo, including their portables. Same thing with the PS1. I think that every PlayStation since console and handheld are better than the PS1. And a lot of them, you can play PS1 games on them. Like the PSP has a huge PS1 library. The PS Vita, you can play all your PS1 games on your PS2 and your PS3. And then the PS4 and PS5 have a lot of the digital library here. Regardless, there's not a shortage of PS1 games or devices that can play PS1 games, whether it be physical, digital, you name it. But yeah, I highly recommend, if you've never played a PS1 or any of the games, I highly recommend you playing a PS1. And yeah, definitely worthy of my top 10. And yeah, my favorite game of the PS1, it will be Final Fantasy 7. If we're excluding Japanese titles. If we're including Japanese titles, it'd probably be Doko de Moisio, the game where this little cat is from, Toru Inoue. He's the mascot of PlayStation, but only in Japan. So if you've never heard of him, he actually is a mascot. I know in America and other places, people are like, oh, who's the Sony mascot? Is it like Astrobot? Is it Kratos? Is it Sackboy? Is it Ratchet and Clank? No, it's actually this little guy right here. He is the PlayStation mascot. But yeah, PS1, guys. Up next, we have the PSP. And just for the sake of it, I'm showing you guys the PSP Go as well. Slides up here, as you can see. But yeah, regardless, the PSP, right? What can I say about this handheld or console, right? At the time, Nintendo was and they still are, they're still dominant, right? Untouchable when it comes to handhelds and portables. The Game Boy run off success. The Game Gear from Sega did not stand a chance. The TurboGrafx 16, they made a Turbo Express, which is a portable version of the TurboGrafx 16. That did not hold a candle as well. And the Atari Lynx, which is Atari's portable, that did not hold a candle. The Game Boy destroyed them all. Then they, did the upgrades, the Game Boy Color, right? Then they did the new console, the Game Boy Advance, and then the DS was coming out, right? So Sony said, "Nah, let's try to compete and get our foot in the water for the portable space." And they come out with the PSP, right? And I will say the PSP, this console had a lot of potential, which it was a success, right? I don't know why people say it was a failure. I'm like, this console sold 85 million units. You want to know which console sold 85 million units? The Xbox 360. So I don't know what, this outsold the Super Nintendo, this outsold the Sega Genesis, this outsold the Atari 2600, this outsold the Nintendo Entertainment System, this outsold the Game Boy Advance, this outsold the Nintendo 3DS, and this was on par with the Xbox 360 on sales. So, from the last time I checked, those consoles, they weren't failures. So I don't know where, that narrative has been coming up in the recent years. But yeah, PSP sold around 85 million units, maybe like 83, somewhere around those, but around the same, right? This console, it basically was a PS2 on the go, right? Around that time, the Game Boy Advance was like a SNES on the go, and the DS, was like primitive 3D-ish graphics, maybe, around the N64 on the go, maybe less. Or around that. This was like PS2 level graphics, not almost, right, not PS2 in itself, but almost PS2, between like PS1, PS2, right? You get to play games like Metal Gear Solid. Games on this game were amazing. PS1 games ran amazing on this thing, right? GTA, Vice City Stories, Liberty City Stories. You got games like Crisis Core, Final Fantasy. You got tons of unique and creative first party games like Loco Roco, Patapon, Parappa the Rapper. I know they made a PSP version of this stuff. Little Big Planet, two Twisted Metal games were good in here. SOCOM, the MotorStorm games. A lot of I know they did the Ratchet and Clank games and the Jack and Daxter spin-offs. A lot of what was unique in the 2000s for PlayStation first party games for both PS2 era, PS3 era, and even PS1 era, right? Were available here, and to me this was just an amazing thing. I wish I grew up with this console. At the time I had a DS, but I always look at the people with the PSP, and I always thought it was so cool because on top of them playing games, right, like Need for Speed or GTA or like Ratchet and Clank, stuff like that, Metal Gear Solid, you can store music on this. This was an iPod, basically. This was an MP3 player. You can store music on this. You can store pictures on this, right? There is a camera accessory that you pop in. There's a GPS accessory, and it will actually work in GPS. And videos, and you can watch movies on this as well with UMD videos, or buy them digitally on the online store. So this was like an iPod or an iPhone, or before a smartphone, right? Search the web on this, stuff like that. So I remember being people like, wow, not only can you play games, but you can literally just jam out, listen to music, pop this in your pocket with some headphones, and just listen to music, look at your videos, take pictures if you had a camera accessory, watch movies and stuff like that. So I was always very jealous of people who had a PSP back in the day. Um, and on top of those games looking very cool as well, because all I had was a DS. Later on I ended up getting a PSP, I want to say like in the 2010s. It was probably after like the PS4 had come out. Right, we were already playing like on PS4 and on Wii U and stuff like Xbox One, and I found a PSP for super cheap. And I bought it, and I played the games, and it was pretty cool. But by the time, right, I couldn't the other features that I had, that I was like jealous as a kid, because I only had a DS, and the DS, all it does was play games and like change the clock, I guess. Right. All those features, they were obsolete by the time, because already we were all on iPhone 4S. No, the 5S was already out by then. People already had iPhone 4s and iPhone 5s and Samsung Galaxy 3s and Samsung Galaxy 4s and blah blah blah. So by then, all that stuff wasn't, it was obsolete, because it's like, okay, all your music is on your phone now. All my music is on my iPod Touch. For those who didn't have iPhones and stuff, your videos, you take pictures on your iPhones, and you watch your movies and YouTube on your iPhone, and then read your email, search the web on your iPhone, etc., etc. But so I couldn't experience that, as a kid, like other kids who had this at the time. But I experienced the games, and man, the games are amazing. I will tell you this: I prefer this now over the DS, even though I grew up with the DS, playing a DS. Right? This isn't one of those kids where like, oh, this is my favorite one, and I prefer over this one because I had it growing up. This is the opposite. I've actually had a DS growing up, loved the games, New Super Mario Brothers, Chrono Trigger, Monkey Ball. What else was on the DS that I really like? No, not Zelda. I actually don't like Zelda on DS because it was all touchscreen bull crap. Um, all the cool the Mario and Luigi games, Bowser's Inside Story. I love the DS and I really liked it, but then I tried this and I played Little Big Planet and Crisis Core, Final Fantasy 7, and all those other games. And wow, like this was so cool. And to me, it's definitely in my top 10. I would definitely give it for sure a top 10, because of that. The games itself, carry it. And then obviously, with the PSP Go is a pretty cool novel thing, but it's only digital stuff, so you don't accept the discs. But modding this stuff is very easy, and then putting games in it is very easy. And this came out during the era where everybody was having like sidekick phones. It was like right before the iPhone took off. But yeah, other than that, what else can I say about the PSP? Other than the games are amazing, and modding it is super easy to play all those games. And yeah, from time to time I go in there, and I think I have like two songs in here just to see how it was, to be like, what, let me see how it was the kids back in the days. I remember I put two songs. I think I have like two songs in here, and I put it in my headphones and listen to it, and the sound quality is all right. It's pretty good, but it's not like like iPhones nowadays level of sound quality or anything like that, or specific music player. I have the camera accessory. I took pictures of it. It looks like shit, but what else can you say from a camera from like the 2000s? But other than that, yeah, PSP definitely my top 10. And my favorite game for the console is a Little Big Planet. All right, guys. Up next, we have the GameCube. Now, as I'm showing you guys, I'm showing off my Japanese orange one. My American GameCube is a black GameCube, because I think the purple indigo one looks stupid, and it's for little kids. And you want to be an edgy guy, and you want to get the cool black hardcore console. Jokes aside, yes, I do have, but that's my American one, the black one. I think the indigo one is cool, but I was like, nah, I like the black one. The black one looks sleek. But anyways, I'm showing off my my Japanese orange one. It's pretty cool. But yeah, the GameCube. What can I say about this console, right? I did not like this console for the longest time growing up, right? I know I mentioned in a video before. It's not a spoiler. Whatever, screw it. For the longest time when I was growing up, the Nintendo 64 was my favorite console of all time. Obviously, even though I didn't grow up with it because I was too young for it. Like I said, I grew up with a Wii and an Xbox 360. Because that's when I was old enough to play games. But with the discovery of the Wii Virtual Console and stuff like that, I was able to discover Nintendo 64 games, and I thought they were the coolest things ever. I was like, wow, Mario 64 looks pretty cool. Wave Race 64, GoldenEye, Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, Diddy Kong Racing, blah blah blah, all those N64 games, right? And then people were like, "Oh, that's cool," but a lot of those games are better off on GameCube, right? 1080p, 1080 snowboarding, 1080 degree snowboarding. The GameCube one is better, right? The Mario games, the Zelda games, Wind Waker is better than Ocarina, or etc. Right? Smash, obviously Smash, the GameCube one is better, etc. Right? But I remember being like, nah, that looks stupid. Like, what the fuck? Like Ocarina of, like, Mario 64 is definitely better than Sunshine. Ocarina of Time is definitely better than Wind Waker, which it is. I think Ocarina of Time is way better than Wind Waker. So I've always thought that the N64 is the coolest console ever. But then the more I started discovering other consoles, right, as you get older, and then I would go back to play the N64, man, I would feel the age in that console. And all of a sudden, the Mario Party games on the N64 don't feel as good. But the GameCube ones, they feel nice. Mario Kart 64 doesn't feel as good, but Double Dash feels amazing. I've always thought Melee was better in 64, obviously. So that one, I remember I admitted a lot. Sunshine, now I actually like Sunshine more than 64 as an adult. Stuff like that. It keeps going on and on. Wave Race, I think the GameCube one is better than 64. Same thing with the 1080 snowboarding games. I think the GameCube one is better. So it just goes on. The only game that I still think is better on N64 is Zelda. Ocarina of Time is still way better than Wind Waker. But everything else, I was like, yeah, the GameCube versions of those games are way better than the 64 ones. And then I started falling in love with the GameCube, right? This console, it sucks. I hate that it was a failure, and I hate that I did not grow up with it because I was still too little and I wasn't old enough to play games, when the Wii came out. Because, man, getting games for this console right now, it feels like winning the lottery is like an easier thing. Games are rare for this console. They're expensive. If you try to do other methods, through PC, if you know what I'm talking about, they're getting harder. And for the longest time, at the recording of this, a Switch 2 hasn't come out yet, but everything has been revealed, so we know GameCube games are coming to NSO on Switch 2. But even then, that's not for me because that's digital only and you're just renting it. So screw that. Man, I would have loved to been old enough to grow up with this era of Nintendo or just consoles, right? And get all those games when they were at retail price, because, man, bro, GameCube games are expensive up the ass. But regardless, that doesn't stop me from getting other methods, wink wink, nudge nudge, of playing games. And wow, this has the most creative Nintendo library of all time, right? Some of the strongest games of all time, right? When it comes to the Nintendo library, right? Not as strong as like the Super Nintendo, but some of these games are better than the Switch counterparts, and definitely more creative, right? And kind of like what I said with the Xbox brand, where the Xbox OG and Xbox 360 era, those were some of Xbox's, Microsoft's more creative, unique, and interesting exclusives. I have that same feeling with GameCube. Some of those creative, unique exclusives of all time on the GameCube, and they turn out to be some of the best, right? And even games that are of long running franchises, I think a lot of their entries are the best, if not on Super Nintendo, then on GameCube, right? Biggest example, Mario Party's games. Like, if you were stranded in an island, I would rather, and right, if you were stranded in an island and they give you two options between these two consoles and access to the whole library, and you're stranded in the island for like a year, I would pick let's say GameCube over Switch. I'll pick GameCube anytime. I'd rather be stuck in an island with the Mario Party games on GameCube over the Mario Party games on Switch. Mario Golf on GameCube way better than the Switch. You know, the sports Mario Golf, the Mario games like Mario Tennis, Mario Golf, Mario Baseball, blah blah blah, whatever. Mario Strikers, the GameCube ones are way better than the Switch ones. Like, oh my god, by far. Um, you know, I I know I have my gripes with Mario Kart 8, and I don't like Mario Kart 8 and how the game feels, and the tracks are too controlled and that stuff. Man, I play Double Dash any day over Mario Kart 8. You know, I rather play Zelda on GameCube any day over Zelda on Switch. You know, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Right? I'd rather play Wind Waker and Twilight Princess and Four Swords Adventures on here. Right? Over the one on the Switch. Mario, either or. I can take Odyssey or Sunshine. I like them. I like them both around equally enough. And third party stuff, man. A lot of you got like Need for Speed, and you got one that came to my mind was called BMX XXX, which apparently it's like a, a game that shows revealing aspects of female body. Let's just say it like that. Nintendo was trying to be edgy and hardcore and creative and unique, and all the stops in this console, and I hate that it failed, because that creates nowadays that everybody wants to play them. And because since the console failed and there's not a lot of consoles and a lot of games out there, that's where they're all expensive on like eBay and stuff. Unlike with popular consoles like the PS2, where there's PS2s everywhere and there's PS2 games everywhere and they're all cheap, right? And I hate that. And this is a console I wish succeeded, and I wish I grew up with. And yeah, man, the games, I can just go on and on and just talk about the GameCube and how great that generation was, the sixth gen, not just for Nintendo but for any of them. I know I've said this for a while. There was times where I don't know which of the two consoles I preferred, the Xbox or the GameCube, and I would go back and forth. And I know around last year I was preferring the Xbox over the GameCube, but I've gone back to play some GameCube games that I haven't played, and I actually tried playing the Xbox again as well. So I kept in mind on playing both consoles, you know, switching back and forth from their libraries. And right now, as you know, I'm preferring the GameCube, but it's one of those things. Those two consoles are so close to me that, you know, I don't know which one I prefer from the time. But I guess, you know, today I prefer the GameCube or the OG Xbox. And yeah, I don't know. I can just gush and gush and gush about this console. The Game Boy player, 4 ports on the controllers, the memory cards. You know, just like the PS1 did the memory cards, and like the PS2 and blah blah blah. Those consoles did the memory cards as this one. I've said this before, and I'll say this again. This would be the greatest console of all time if Nintendo stuck with regular sized discs. I wholeheartedly believe that, because think about this. Imagine a world, alternate universe, where GameCube also got games like Devil May Cry and GTA. Like, really, really think about it. Like, think about the GameCube, right? It was bigger because you could, you know, accept, you know, it takes in regular discs, so more memory, and then the discs are bigger, and then bigger storage space, and you can put bigger games in it. And you're like, yeah, my GameCube can play Mario Sunshine, Wind Waker, Smash Brothers Melee, and Need for Speed, and Devil May Cry, and GTA. That, oh my god, I'm telling you, that would have been the greatest console of all time. It just would have. It just would have. And I think that was the biggest mistake the GameCube, in my opinion, was taking mini CDs or mini discs, whatever you call them, and not taking full-on size discs. And just that mistake alone, it held it back from being the greatest console of all time. But hey, regardless, the games are good, regardless of its flaws. It's a very flawed system, but man, the library, it's very unique and creative for Nintendo, and it's some of the best. And it is my favorite. Yeah, I think it's probably my favorite Nintendo console of all time, at least home console wise. If we're talking portable, there's one that I like better than the GameCube, and that would be, you know, my favorite Nintendo product ever. But yeah, the GameCube, man, I really liked it. I started from not really liking it and to the point that I really like it. And then yeah, speaking of the N64, now that console won't even make my top 10. Like you're not gonna see it. Like spoiler alert, you're not gonna see the N64 in this top 10. But yeah, you will see the GameCube. And yeah, not only that, but this also got Sega games because that's when Sega was going third party. So some of the games were going on GameCube, some on PS2, some on Xbox. So Sonic Adventure 2 was really good in here. Super Monkey Ball was good in here. Crazy Taxi was good in here, etc. Even though I have Crazy Taxi, I have it on PS2 because, like I said, PS2 games are very cheap because they're everywhere. Meanwhile, the Crazy Taxi, the GameCube version of Crazy Taxi, would be more expensive because GameCube games, they're rare and expensive because there's not a lot of them out there in the wild. But yeah, my favorite game for the GameCube is, it's a three-way tie that I'm trying to battle, is Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, Super Monkey Ball 2, and Twilight Princess. I'll say it's Twilight Princess. All right, up next we have the Nintendo 3DS. This is my favorite Nintendo product of all time. By far. There's times where I'm like, the GameCube is up there. I like the Super Nintendo a lot. You know, but I'm like, there's just something about the 3DS and its games that just gives me full on like pure joy. And yeah, it is my favorite Nintendo handheld of all time for sure. My favorite Nintendo product of all time for sure. Hardware, and yeah, what can I say? This is a big improvement over the DS, right? I mentioned before in my PSP segment. I grew up with the DS, right? That's the portable I had. I didn't have a PSP or anything of the sorts. Um, and I played Game Boy Advance games on it, right? Because the DS Lite could play GBA games on it. So I enjoyed, library of GBAs and the library of DS games. But I've always felt like DS games were like crappy. I know it's gonna sound horrible, but they were crappy like mini flash games that you later end up seeing like on your iPhone or something. Like most of the DS games, they were like, oh, touch here, move around the stylus here, blow here, yell on the mic, like this and that, like. And obviously, I get it. The point of portable games are supposed to be quick, bite-sized games that you play here, you go in here, you play for like a level that lasts like 5 minutes, and then you got to do something, you quickly put it in your pocket and go, right? I get that, obviously, right? That's the point of portable. But I feel like they were too gimmicky, they lacked flavor. They were one-dimensional games that, you know, I don't know. That was just for me. They didn't feel like complete games, right? Stuff like Zelda on the DS. I hate Phantom Hourglass and I hate Spirit Tracks. It's just bull crap that you just move the stylus with, and that's the whole point of the game. And you just blow on things and then move around with the stylus and like, yeah, if I want to play Zelda, I want to play with buttons and a D-pad and then regular buttons, right? That's just me. So that's what I felt for most of the DS library, right? Just a crap ton of shovelwares. The first party games were great, but a lot of them they felt in that flaw that I don't like about it. Like I just said, the Zelda games, right? But most of them were very good, right? But going into the 3DS, right? As a kid, I thought that the games just looked better. Like Mario 3D Land looks better, right, than whatever was on the DS, right? Like a remake of Mario 64 DS. Mario Kart 7, it looks better on like everything just looked better. The Zelda games, right? A Link Between Worlds, and obviously remaking Ocarina of Time 3D and Majora's Mask 3D. I was like, finally, an actual Zelda games, right? And let's say we're not counting the 3D remakes of Ocarina of Majora's, right? And we're just talking about Link Between Worlds. Still, finally an actual Zelda game that I can play with like buttons and move around with the D-pad or the joystick or whatever. It was that type of feeling for me. And then on top of that, you had JRPGs, and just more complete, fulfilling games, right? The Xenoblade came out on this. Fire Emblem blew up on this. Kid Icarus Uprising was amazing, even though the control, the control was because you had to, like, most of the time you had to do the touchpad thing. That was really mostly for aiming, right? Like the whole game wasn't centered around it. It was mostly for aiming, but you still move with this and you shoot with this. But control, whatever. But the game itself was beautiful and it was amazing, right? Animal Crossing, New Leaf on this was amazing. Nintendogs plus Cats, obviously Tamagotchi Life, everything, just everything. First party games, third party games, Monster Hunter, everything was just beautiful on the 3DS, and it was, to me, it was way better than a DS. I know that's a hot take nowadays. I don't know why. Maybe just people who grew up with a DS. Like I mentioned before on the previous segments, where a lot of people, they think that what they grow up with is the best thing and it's the better one, which, understandably so, nostalgia and stuff like that. But like I said before, I grew up with the DS, and nowadays I wouldn't pick it up over a 3DS or a PSP. I prefer the PSP over DS, and I prefer the 3DS over the DS. Even though I grew up with a DS and never had a PSP as a kid, and never got a 3DS until later in my life. When I was becoming, already going from teenage to adult, and finally, making your own money. But yeah, that was just me. And I think, to me, that proves that the library in itself, the console itself, the games themselves, they're just better. Because I know that at that point, nostalgia is not blinding me at all. Like it's just not. Like, I have nostalgia for DS games, but that's not gonna tell me, hey man, they're better than PSP and 3DS. No, I think the 3DS is like a 10 times better than the DS. The library itself is amazing. It sucks that it didn't sell as much as the DS, or even more, because I think this console, if out of those two, if there's one that deserves the 150 million units sold, I think it's the 3DS over the DS any day of the week. Like, it's not even a joke. And the libraries are just way better. And like I mentioned with the NES going to the SNES, I think that's what it is feels like. It's just better. It's just super. But yeah, that's my take on the 3DS. It is my favorite Nintendo product of all time. Not to mention too, how the company was at the time. I feel like Nintendo during the 3DS and the Wii U era, they were obviously, because they were struggling with the Wii U, but they were more consumer friendly, pro consumer. They were willing to do deals with people. They really want, when a company wants you to love them, they would give you the world, right? That's why Nintendo, they're cocky and arrogant now in the Switch era, going to the Switch 2, because they're like, oh, we're the king of the world. Yeah, we don't care about you. But when they're like, please love me, I will wash your feet, I would make you food, I would give you a house, I would, give you freebies, just love me, please. And this era, Nintendo, they were, and that era, so, oh my god, the amount of times like 3DS games were discounted, or the pre-order bonuses, or if you get this, you get this other thing for free, right? A lot of times on Wii U and 3DS games, like those versions, there were times where if you pre-order one, if you pre-order one, you get the 3DS version for free, or you get it like at a discounted price, or just crazy stuff. Like, oh my god, like just cool stuff that Nintendo was. But obviously, because they were trying to make us love them, right? And I guess that that also stuck with me as well, and I guess that just enriched the experience of the 3DS. Rather, maybe that also adds up to the reason why I prefer this over the DS, and why this is my favorite Nintendo product of all time. But judging how the GameCube is my favorite home console, my favorite Nintendo home console is the GameCube. My favorite portable Nintendo Portable is the 3DS, and they were both in that similar era of Nintendo, where Nintendo was being creative and unique, and they were like, "Please love me, I'll give you anything, just love me, just buy the GameCube." So they gave us some of the best, most creative games of all time on the GameCube. I feel like same thing on the 3DS, and I guess that helps in my case because I'm like, yeah, Nintendo, they were washing my feet. They were cooking me meals. They were giving me freebies with pre-orders and then cutting us deals. I know there's a meme nowadays where like, damn, GameCubes. There's a commercial of the GameCube that was like $99, and you include like Mario Kart Double Dash, just things like that. I guess that adds to the experience for me, and why, on top of the library as well being amazing. So yeah, 3DS, my favorite Nintendo product of all time, my favorite Nintendo hardware of all time, my favorite Nintendo Portable of all time. And yeah, my favorite game on the Nintendo 3DS is Kid Icarus Uprising. Even though the game has shitty controls, man, those characters and that story was very amazing, and I hope it comes to the Switch or the Switch 2. But yeah, the Fire Emblem games are really good on this as well. Though those are close seconds, Fire Emblem Awakening and Fates and Echoes, the remake of Gaiden, amazing. The library in this is amazing. And if you played a DS and never experienced a 3DS, do yourself a favor and get the 3DS and play its games, whether it's legitimate or other means, because it's a very easy console to mod nowadays, kind of like with the PSP and the PS Vita. I highly, highly, highly recommend you playing the 3DS. All right, up next we have the PlayStation Vita. This is my favorite portable of all time. It was actually a very hard decision for me to decide whether my favorite portable was the 3DS or the Vita. Those I really love those consoles. Like, they're close to my heart. 3DS, amazing library. The games in that console, it's near perfect. Same thing with the Vita. Even though the 3DS was more of a success and it had more successful games and more games, first party support for it. Meanwhile, this was unfortunately abandoned. I will say I ultimately slightly like the Vita better. Right. Unfortunately, Sony abandoned this console halfway through its lifespan. They saw that the sales weren't very good. Because around the time that the PS Vita and the 3DS come out, people were getting in, smartphones were getting more popular, iPads and tablets were getting more popular, and with that came mobile gaming, and just other means that people would get their entertainment, in a portable space. So people were playing like Temple Run and Candy Crush and Angry Birds, right? That people were, they were doing that on their phones and on their tablets. So handhelds, there was no point of handhelds, right? Because they're like, oh, I can already just play a mobile game on my phone. Why am I gonna spend another $200 or $170 for an extra console, plus then spend more on the games just to play games where my phone can do everything, play games and then everything else, right? So even though the 3DS was a success, the sales still hit. Like the change in the marketplace, it affected its sales. That's why you see the DS was 154 million units sold, and the 3DS is only 75 million, right? And like I've mentioned, even though I think the 3DS is a better console than the DS, and I think the 3DS deserved more success than the DS, just the market was changing, and portables were dwindling in popularity. So you got that aspect on the Nintendo side, and on the PlayStation side, it was even more. They got hit even more, right? The PSP was like 85 million units. I want to say 83, 85, whatever, around that number. So the PSP was that, and then this was only around 15 million units. Which, yeah, the first party games though in this were amazing, like Uncharted, Tearaway, Little Big Planet. You had obviously Persona 4 Golden, which wasn't a first party, but it was an exclusive. You had the God of War games in here, the Sly Coopers, the Jack and Daxter collection, Ratchet and Clank, PlayStation All Stars Battle Royale. A lot of games that they had. If you bought this version, you get the PS3 version, or if you buy the PS3 version, you get the Vita version for free. Cross save, cross compatibility, cross buy. So if you buy, either or, you get the other one for free. Um, just it was amazing. It was one of, like I mentioned before, both Sony and Nintendo around that time, they were very creative. They were very unique. A lot of their games were very creative, very unique, you know, and very good, right? So, and it sucks that, whenever a company, they put on their most creative and most unique work, a lot of times that's when they don't succeed. But then when they're succeeding, that's when they're at their blandest, their most boring, the most generic, the most copy and paste, from the last games, you know, stuff like that. Like, look at Nintendo now. They're not creative and unique, and most of the games are just copy and paste blends of the next one. Same thing with PlayStation nowadays. And let's not even get into the mess that Xbox is. But yeah, this to me reminds me of an era of when PlayStation was at their most unique and creative, kind of like with the PSP, falling off of the PSP, and that time, they were on the PS3, which to me it's the most creative and unique era as well, right? With, same thing with the PS2 and PS1, before they got very standardized, and it's the same formula, right? In the PS4 and PS5 era. Um, and yeah, so some of the most unique and creative first party games, and not even first party, just also third party games in here as well, were on this system. And to me, the games is what makes a system. On top of that, this is actually an amazing console. This is way better than the PSP in pretty much every aspect. It takes in cartridges, right? Let me see if I have a game in here. Little Big Planet, right? It takes cartridges. The PSP would take mini discs, which the load times on them were not good. You could hear the disc go, stuff like that. And just loading times and everything. Cartridges, were better. No loading times. They don't do noise. They can hold more space. The console itself is amazing, right? The buttons are better. The triggers, we now have doubles, two sticks. When the PSP one only had one joystick, we have two sticks. The touch screen on the screen, and the touch pad on the back, right? The console itself is nearly perfect. There were some flaws though in design, right? Um, you know, like I said, even though it's near perfect, there was only a few flaws, and one of them, and the biggest one, were the memory cards, which was proprietary memory cards, which they were expensive, and it sucked. And that kind of was like, damn, bro, the memory cards are like almost as expensive as the console itself for like the highest one. I think the 64 gigabyte one, or the 120. I don't know which one was it, but one of them was almost as expensive as the console itself. That was crazy. The console itself was expensive at launch too, because like Shuhei Yoshida said, they kind of over engineered. They said, he said, obviously looking back in retrospective, two if there were two things that he would change about the Vita, it would be the proprietary memory cards, and he would just make it use regular SD cards. And he would get rid of the touchpad where it wasn't necessary, because it just costs more stuff. So get rid of this, and this just won't be a touchpad, and then just use a touchscreen. And to be honest, I think I would agree. But regardless, what we got with the touchpad and the games that utilized it, it was very fun, right? What else can I say about this console, man? The games were amazing. This was an indie developer game haven, right? At the time, if you were an indie developer, right, you would most likely put your games on the PS Vita, as well as on Steam and PS4 and blah blah blah, right? But yeah, Undertale, and this is amazing. Terraria, Shovel Knight, tons and tons of indie games, tons of Japanese JRPG games. Like, dude, this is amazing. Like, the library in this is amazing. Obviously, someone who loves JRPGs. So you got all that on top of the Sony, the one of the most creative Sony first party games, like Little Big Planet and Tearaway. Um, and yeah, this is just the perfect recipe for console for me. Obviously, this did all the cool stuff that you can see in smartphones now. That also the PSP did as well. You know, it has a camera, right? It has a front-facing camera, back-facing camera, so you take pictures, take videos. You can watch movies or videos that you've downloaded. Put in music, so you can pop it in and listen to it like an iPod. Search the web, emails. They had like a Street Pass functionality, kind of like the 3DS with the Street Pad. I think here this one they call it Near, if I'm not mistaken. Um, you can have a few apps open and close them. Kind of like on like an iPhone. It was just it was very ahead of its time, right? And then, but the biggest thing that made it ahead of its time was remote play, right? So you could do some sort of remote play with the PSP, but it wasn't as good with the Vita. It was almost fantastic, right? Obviously, as long as your connection was good, whether it was internet or connecting to the console itself, right? But you could literally play an entire PS4 game in here through remote play. To the point that Sony, every PS4 game, Sony mandated, required that if you're playing a game on PS4, it has to be playable through remote play on Vita. So literally every single PS4 game, you can play it on the Vita through remote play. And I've tried it before. I've tried playing Persona 5 in here, works fine. Obviously, like not anything too action paced that you need like frame perfect movement. It won't work the best. So something like a fighting game or Call of Duty, it wouldn't be ideal playing it in here. You still can, but it wouldn't be ideal. But something like a Persona game or maybe like a platformer like Little Big Planet. I remember I tried playing God of War and here like the 2018 God of War just cause Nier Automata, stuff like that, like racing games as well, like Team Sonic Racing, Sonic Mania on PS4. I played it here remote play, just exploring what works in here, and it was very good. It was perfect. So this is a very good remote play machine if you like that as well. And nowadays, this is very good at modding. So if you want to mod it and installed emulators, you can. This runs perfect. Super Nintendo and GBA games and stuff like that. And also, just like the PSP, a lot of PS1 games they play perfectly here. So PS1 games run beautifully here. This is backwards compatible with PSP games digitally only though, because it doesn't take discs. So a lot of PSP games like Loco Roco, Patapon, a lot of the first party stuff and even third party stuff, they work here as well. So that's pretty good, right? And yeah, and this can also obviously the PS3 games that were crossplay here. So this was literally like, it was like an all-in-one device kind of, that unfortunately it was too advanced for its time. I think it was ahead of its time. Sony kind of like, as I love them being creative and unique and excuse me, they kind of went a little overboard, which unfortunately it bit them in the ass. And yeah, unfortunately, this is one of those consoles, kind of like the Dreamcast, kind of like the Sega Saturn, kind of like the GameCube, where they're amazing consoles. Like, oh my god, like people who's played those consoles, they swear that those consoles are the greatest thing ever, but unfortunately they failed because nobody played them. This is right along them. Like, this is literally like that, like what a Dreamcast or a GameCube is, where people are like, this console's amazing, but nobody had it. This goes in that conversation as well, because man, the games in here are amazing and they're all some of the greatest games. But yeah, the consoles just didn't do amazing, so nobody knows about them. Nobody has played them, right? And unfortunately, also, just like the GameCube and the Dreamcast and the Saturn, those games are expensive. Games on the Vita are expensive. You want to get physical Vita games, they're expensive. Because like I said, there's not a lot of Vitas out there in the wild, and there's not a lot of Vita games out there in the wild, so they're not in abundance. They're all rare and expensive. So I would highly suggest, if you get a Vita, just mod it and just get the games like that way. because you will break your wallet trying to get Vita games individually, and it sucks. So pretty much the same thing like I've said about the GameCube and the Dreamcast, and then since the Saturn. But yeah, other than that, I highly recommend you get a Vita if you're interested in it. If you want to play games, this runs, like I said, this runs PS1 games very good. This runs like Super Nintendo and NES and Genesis games and Game Boy Advance games really good. Like this is a good portable device. Like not this. I have a white Vita, and that one I play all my Super Nintendo games on it, and all my GBA games and Game Boy games on it because it runs them beautifully. Like why not, right? Plus, it's a portable. Like I'm playing GBA games on a portable, which is Vita, which makes sense. But yeah. Anyways, my favorite game on the PS Vita is I want to say Little Big Planet. I was gonna say Persona 4 Golden, but lately I've been Little Big Planet. I've been playing it on the Vita a lot, and wow, this game is very good. It might even be the best Little Big Planet in the series because the Little Big Planet Vita game is so good. But yeah, Little Big Planet PS Vita version is my favorite PS Vita game. All right, up next it'll be the PS4. I'm showing you off this PS4 Slim that I have over here. But my main PS4 Slim that I use is hooked up there, but I got this other one laying around here. So yeah, I guess I'll just be showing you off this other PS4 Slim. Don't mind this. I don't know what this is. This is my brother's PS4 Slim, so I guess I'll have to ask him what the hell he did to his PS4. But anyways, yeah. Showing off here the PS4 Slim, but PS4 regardless. PS4, PS4 Slim, PS4 Pro, any of them. The PS4 console itself, what an amazing console. What can I say about the PS4 that has not been said? A lot of people say it's the PS2 of its time, right? Of the modern era, right? Where everything is on it. All the third-party games are on it. All the best first-party games are on it. Every developer is making games on it. It is easy to develop for. It is destroying its competition, right? That kind of sounds like the PS2 to me, or the PS1, back in their day. But anyways, regardless, yeah. I don't know. All the at the time, the Xbox was struggling because of Don Matrix's dumb decisions, and nobody wanted a an Xbox, excuse me, an Xbox One. So everybody who was on a 360, including myself, because I played 360, my majority of the 7th generation. We all flooded to PS4. Everybody who had a PS3, they all flooded to PS4. Everybody who had a Wii as a kid and they were growing up and then they not want to make fun of by saying you have a Wii. They were all flooding to PS4 because the Xbox One sucked, the Wii U sucked. So yeah. What can I say? Probably one of the strongest first party lineups for Sony ever, right? God of War, Spider-Man, Horizon. You got Gravity Rush. Gravity Rush 1 was on a Vita, but Gravity Rush 2 was on PS4. Little Big Planet 3, Bloodborne, Ghost of Tsushima, right? I can just keep going on and on and on and on about the PS4's amazing first party lineup, right? And then on top of that, the third party stuff. All the third party games played best on PlayStation. GTA 5, Red Dead Redemption 2. A lot of people got into games like Overwatch on console. Obviously not the PC versions, but on console. And yeah, from software with games like Bloodborne was exclusive on PS4, but stuff like the Dark Souls games and yeah, the PS4. Unfortunately, one thing I will say about the PS4 is that even though it is some of their most their best and strongest first party lineup, it is a lot of low key just copy and paste, right? A lot of games are third person over the shoulder action adventure cinematic games. Not saying that they're bad, they're all amazing. Obviously, that's why God of War and Ghost of Tsushima and Last of Us 2, Even though I personally don't like Last of Us 2, it's universally a good game. Horizon Zero Dawn, all those games are all amazing, but it's a lot of copy and paste and lack of creativity, and they're not unique like how Sony's first party games were on PS1, PS2, and PS3, and PSP and PS Vita to an extent, right? So that is what my big gripe, right, about the PS4, and the reason why is not, even higher. As amazing it is, this is a near perfect console as well. The last time I ever said that it being a near perfect console, I would probably say the SNES earned that title, or the PS2. But yeah, a lot of Japanese games. I'm a huge fan of Japanese RPG games, so stuff like Nier Automata, Persona 5, a lot of the Neptunia games, stuff like that. Most of them, they were either exclusive on PS4, or they just ran the best on PS4, or were developed on the PS4 in mind before then coming out on later the Switch, right? After the Wii U had discontinued pretty early. And yeah, this console for its generation was just reigning supreme, right? The Switch, it came out, and it did very good as well. But I know people say, is the Switch, is it part of the 8th gen? Is it part of the 9th gen? I wouldn't say there. I wouldn't compare the PS4 and the Switch like that, because sure, the PS4 had a head start over the Switch, but guess what? The PS4 stopped production when the Switch was still going on in production. So it's kind of like a weird thing to put them head to head, at least in my opinion, when it comes to sales and which was more successful and stuff like that. Because as the Switch numbers kept going up and up, the PS4 is stopped production. But yeah, besides the Switch, the PS4 was like the console to get in the 2010s. Hell, even during the pandemic, because PS5 wasn't able to get, a lot of people, and even myself included, you had co-companion consoles, right? People had a PS4 with a Switch, right? Or vice versa. The PS4 was their main console, and then their Switch was like their secondary. Or mostly people who were Nintendo fans, if they were to explore a console outside of the Switch, they would get a PS4. I know a lot of people that are mostly Nintendo fans, and they only play Nintendo stuff. From when I used to compete in the Smash community, and a lot of those people are Nintendo only people. They were like, you know what? Yo, I got a PS4. It's like my first console ever, outside of the Nintendo ecosystem, because this console was just so attractive, and the games and the library was just so attractive, and stuff like Persona 5 and Nier Automata and Spider-Man and God of War and Horizon, they were just too attractive to pass up, right? So yeah, I don't know what else I can say about this console. This console is just amazing. It's just good overall. If there's anything bad I want to say about this console, it's pretty much that. But that's just a gripe. That's just me, my type of games. Like I said about a lot of them are not creative and unique. It's just third person over the shoulder action adventure games. But that's not an actual flaw. That's just a flaw for me, and why it's not like top 2, top 3 status for me. But hey, it's pretty high on the list, and I don't know what else I can say. I mean, this console refuses to die. Just games just keep coming onto it, and we're in the middle, or going into the middle of 2025, and we got games still coming for this console. I feel like this might be like a PS2 situation, where we had games coming out on the PS2 like 14 years after the PS2 came out. We might have this. We might still see games on the PS4 until like 2027, to be honest. Because this console it's like the baseline, right? Plus since if the Switch is weaker, right? If the Switch is around like Xbox 360 power level, PS3 power level, and the PS4 is stronger than the Switch, the OG Switch. And if games come out for the Switch, there's no reason why it wouldn't come out on the PS4. So that's probably why we still see PS4 games, because we still see Switch games. And the Switch is the weakest console, that games are still coming out for. So it's like, yeah, like think about it. If you or me, we're going to put out a game for the Switch, then might as well put it on the PS4, and then obviously on the PS5 and Xbox and Steam. So that's probably why. I feel like until we not we don't see Switch games anymore coming out for games coming out for the OG Switch, that's when we stop seeing PS4 games as well, because PS4 game, PS4 is more powerful than a Switch. So I think third parties, they would just naturally put it as well on PS4, along with obviously the newer consoles like PS5 and Xbox and the upcoming Switch too. But yeah, that's what I can say about it. I guess the only other gripe I have with this console, quote unquote, but it's not even this console itself, is just, I guess, the online infrastructure of Sony, is that how do I say this? This is basically gonna be the baseline from now on when it comes to like the Sony's online ecosystem, or just ecosystem in general, where your profile and the online store and the PlayStation online store and on the app, this is like the first, and then everything else we just move on. So what I mean by that is that let's say for example the PSN store, right? On whether you access it through console or on your PC or on your mobile phone, this is the earliest we're gonna see, right? PS4 games on that store, and then because it's the same store that you access on PS4 and on PS5 and eventually on PS6, 7 going on, right? And we can't, a lot of stuff that happened on PS3 is almost like as if it never happened, right? So we can't access the PS3 PSN store unless you're on PS3. I don't know if you get what I mean, right? Meanwhile, the PS4 online store, you can access it on PS4, PS5, and on PC and on mobile phones. But that's not a PS4's fault. I feel like that's just Sony's infrastructure, where they try to reset everything, and basically make this like the baseline PlayStation going from now on. But yeah, other than that, it's a near perfect console, man. I don't know what else I can tell you. And my favorite game on the PS4 is, for the longest time, it was Persona 5 Royal. That is a perfect game. But then I played a little game called Little Big Planet 3, and holy crap, that is my favorite PS4 game of all time. It's up here. Little Big Planet 3. We got here into the top 3, guys. So yeah, my top 3 favorite consoles from now on. And yeah, at number 3 we have the Sega Dreamcast, right? As you can see here, I have the Hello Kitty edition, the pink Hello Kitty one. I'm still on the lookout for the blue one, but yeah, this is a very rare console, by the way. But yeah, what else can I say about the Dreamcast than what has been said, right? This was Sega at their most creative, most unique. This was Sega trying their hardest, and to be honest, I might even say this was their peak. I know people say, wow, the Genesis was their peak, blah, blah. But like I mentioned before, with how Nintendo used to be and how Sony used to be, when they were like, struggling, they were at, they were putting out the most creative, most unique games, some of their best games. And on top of that, the company itself, since they were wanting you to love them, so they were giving you the best deals they had. They were treating you like kings, when they're like, oh, please love me, I would treat you like a king, I would do all that stuff. When a company's like that, that's when they're at their best, and in my opinion, they create some of their best games and have some of their best products, hardware or software wise. And then when a company's at the top of the world, they just do the bare minimum. We kind of see that with the Switch now, with Nintendo, with the Switch going on to the Switch 2, where they're just cocky and arrogant as hell. And yeah, but at the end, so in my opinion, I think this was Sega at their most, like, please love me, because they were struggling, and this was their do or die moment. And unfortunately, they died because this was their last console ever, and this console's lifespan was cut short. But man, during that time, they had some of their best games they've ever released. Some amazing first-party exclusives, third-party exclusives, third-party multiplats. You got stuff like Jet Set Radio, Crazy Taxi 1, Crazy Taxi 2, Shenmue 1. I know Shenmue 2 was Xbox, or at least here in America. You got Sonic Adventure 1, Sonic Adventure 2, Samba de Amigo. I can just go on and on and on about amazing Dreamcast, Sega GT. I can just go on and on about amazing first party Sega games. And in my opinion, a lot of those games, those first party Sega Dreamcast games, are some of their best games. I think those are even better than a lot of the first party games that they put out on the Genesis, to be honest. And I at least would rather play them over first party games on the Genesis. Same thing with Saturn. Even though, to be fair, a lot of the Saturn ones, since most of the libraries stuck in Japan, I have yet to try a lot of it. But from what I've tried, still, like Nights into Dream is really good and Pastor Dragoon is really good. But I would say a lot of the first party games on Dreamcast outclass those, right? And then, not to mention third party games that you could play on, like the Tony Hawk games, Resident Evil. A lot of those games, they ran the best at the time, right? Compared to the PS1 and the N64 version. And even then, some of the games on this system run better than on PS2. And GameCube, like Capcom versus SNK2, Marvel versus Capcom 2. A lot of those games, people say that they run better on here than they do on like PS2 and GameCube and even Xbox. So there's that, right? Obviously, this wasn't the most part. This is the weakest console out of the 4 and the 6 generation. But there's something to be said about that, right? 4 players. This is the perfect multiplayer console. And I know a lot of people say the N64 was, but I think this was up there as well. With party games, multiplayer games, online stuff. This is the first console to do online very well. You got the line. This is the 56K modem here that you could put it back in the day, but then they later came out with the Ethernet one, so you replace this with the Ethernet broadband, and the online is even better. You get play games like Fantasy Star Online and just all those other cool. This is basically the precursor to Xbox Live. What it was, Sega Net, I believe it was called. Correct me if I'm wrong down in the comments. My Sega knowledge is a little rusty, right? Because I haven't I haven't refreshed my memory in a lot of this stuff. But yeah, the library carries this console so much, like holy crap. Not to mention the memory cards that other than what you see here, other than the Pocket Station, right? Which these are the PS1 unique memory cards. Other than those, the Dreamcast probably has the most and the best memory card, the VMUs, right? Which is similar to that. I should have brought one here so I can show you guys, but it's one in the cabinets away. But stuff like that, right? This, unfortunately, the Sega, they still couldn't come back, from their loss with the Saturn, right? And unfortunately failed and only lived around 2.5 years, I want to say. And yeah, in late 2001 they discontinued it. And we see a lot of the Sega Dreamcast games, they were ported mostly into Xbox, but also into PlayStation 2 and GameCube. And yeah, there's really nothing else I can say about this console other than the library itself carries it. I mean, there's nothing to the console itself. It plays games, listens to music, it's from that era, goes online. Obviously not anymore, but other than that, yeah, it's what else can I say? It's compact, it's sleek, it's beautiful as well. If we're speaking of the console itself, VGA support in this is beautiful, runs at beautiful 480p. And itself got like a Japanese special edition one. You can mod it as well if you want to go that route as well and play games like that, because like I mentioned before with the GameCube and the Saturn and the PS Vita, since this console didn't sell that much, games are expensive for it because there's not a lot of consoles out there in the wild in abundance, and there's not a lot of Dreamcast games out there in the wild in abundance. So they're rare and they're far and few between. So they're expensive, unfortunately. But modding makes it easier, and you get those games other means, without having to break your wallet. And to be honest, I probably recommend that as well, to be honest, because Dreamcast games are expensive. They're not like Saturn games or GameCube games, but they're expensive. They're like Vita. Vita's not expensive like this. Like out of those 4 consoles, the least expensive one would be the Vita, but it's still expensive. But they're all up there. They're consoles that I recommend you not physically buying games one by one, because your wallet would just cry and help, and your bank account would just. um, but yeah, I don't know what else I can say, man. I mean, all these games are amazing, and it's one of those consoles where you should experience, right? Obviously, I did not grow up with this because I wasn't even born when it. No, I was born, but I was like a literal baby. I was like a few months old when this console came out back in '99. Um, but yeah, I I heard about this console, in retrospective, right? Like I said, I grew up with the during the Wii 360 PS3 era. But I went back, obviously, during like the later on, as you get older, you're a teenager, you become an adult, you get money, you get to explore. So I bought a Dreamcast. I want to say it was 2018, 2017. 2018 sounds about right. My memory might be slightly warped, but it was around that era. I bought a Dreamcast, and I bought two games. I bought Sega GT, and I want to say Crazy Taxi was included in that bundle as well. Yes, because Sonic Adventure was disc only, and it was in the console. So it was like Sonic Adventure was in here, but then two physical copies of um um Crazy Taxi and then Sega GT. And that was my first taste. And wow, Crazy Taxi was a lot of fun. Sega GT was like Gran Turismo, but slightly more arcadey. But it was very fun. It had that Sega flavor that makes games so fun. And then Sonic Adventure is Sonic Adventure. Come on, even though I had already played Sonic Adventure 1 and 2, on the GameCube, and obviously digitally through Xbox Live on Xbox 360 and on PlayStation 3 digitally. It was very interesting playing it, on the hardware itself, and it's very fun. And after that, I got hooked and I played some of the other games. And yeah, dude, top three, man. My third favorite console of all time. The library is that amazing. This console is that amazing. And like how I said with the PS Vita, it's one of those consoles where everybody that has played this have been telling you, are telling you, please try this. You're not gonna regret it. Like, this console is amazing. It just sucks that it didn't sell well, so nobody's played it. So the exact same thing I said about the Vita applies to the Dreamcast. But yeah, my favorite game on the Dreamcast is Sonic Adventure 2. I know it's a basic answer. I'm sorry, but it's a very good game. Sonic Adventure 1 is up there as well, like in my top three. It's number 2 and number 1. Both Sonic Adventure games are, my number 2, my number 1. But yeah, let me know, what do you guys think about the Dreamcast? And do you like this cool color? It's pretty cool, right? So my number 2 console is the PlayStation 2. Right? I think see here from this angle right here. Yeah. My fat PS2 is hooked up in the CRT, and then my slim PS2 was somewhere down there. And I didn't want to dig through the bins and stuff to get it, so I had the box in close proximity, so I grabbed it. Why not? But yeah, the PS2 is my second favorite console of all time. What can you say about the PS2, right? Just like the Super Nintendo and the PS4, I think this is also a near perfect console, just like those two that I mentioned. And yeah, the reason why this goes above them is, like most of these people, when they make a top 10 list like this, is experiences, right? And I guess flaws, right? For me, not that the Super Nintendo and the PS4, I guess, do things worse than the PS2. It's just I feel like, how do I say this? Experience, and also the situation, right? So for example, right, I was born in 98, right? And I was too little, obviously, to play stuff from this era, right? The early 2000s, the sixth gen, right? PS2, GameCube, Xbox, Dreamcast. But I was old enough to play stuff on the Wii, and that's where I grew up with the Wii, the Xbox 360, PS3, that era, right? So I didn't get to experience Super Nintendo that much. So all my Super Nintendo stuff is retroactively, right? And amazing console, right? Perfect games. PS4, obviously, I got it. I experienced it when it was the relevant console, and I was getting experience it. But the thing that holds me back with that console from being any higher is that, like I mentioned before, even though it has probably the best first party library of of PlayStation, and it probably has the best library of all time. Whether it's first party PlayStation exclusive or just third party multiplats. To me, the first party games, they were the least creative. Even though they're some of the best, they were the least creative. There were a lot of them were just 3D action adventure over the shoulder cinematic copy and paste games, right? They weren't unique and creative like stuff from this era and stuff from the PS1 era and the PSP and the Vita and the PS3 era. And to me, I hold that with more value than what the PS4 has to offer. And yeah, that's basically the reason why I have this over the Super Nintendo and the PS4, even though those are other consoles that I think are near perfect, just like this one, is the first party lineup and the third party lineup as well. And there was just everything for everyone. For example, in the Super Nintendo era, you can get through that era without having a Super Nintendo, and having a Genesis, right? And in the PS4 era, towards the end though, I would not say towards the beginning. You know, if you in the first half of the age generation, if you only had an Xbox One or a Wii U and didn't have the PS4, you're basically missing like 80% of gaming in the gaming industry, right? But then you can get away with having a Switch only without, when that came out in the second half of the F generation, and not having a PS4, right? So that's why I take away points from those as well, because you could go on the whole generation without owning a Super Nintendo and owning a Genesis, and you'd be fine. Same thing with the 8th gen. You could go like at least the second half of the 8th gen, going on just owning a Switch and not have a PS4, and you could be fine. But with this era, you kind of needed to have a PS2 all the way, or you're basically missing 80% of gaming, the industry, the games, everything, because a lot of them did not come on. The Dreamcast was already gone, by the end of 2001, and a lot of them did not come on Xbox and GameCube. And yeah, this was where all the third party games were at. This was where all the first party games were at. This was a console for everything, like hardcore gamers, casual gamers. There was something for everyone in this console, right? And obviously, since I didn't grow up with it, right, the way I experienced and discovered PS2 games, it was, kind of like how I discovered retro Nintendo games, right? The way I just discovered retro Nintendo games was through the Wii Virtual Console on the Wii, and through Smash Brothers Brawl and Smash Brothers Melee, because the Wii is backwards compatible with GameCube games. So I would play Brawl and Melee on the Wii. And the trophy list, Smash was like a museum of Nintendo. So through Smash, Brawl, and Melee, and the Nintendo, the Virtual Console on the Wii, that's how I was able to discover and explore retro games, right? On the Xbox, it was some backwards compatible games on the OG Xbox, worked in 360, but also Xbox Live Arcade, and just Xbox Live in general. You could play old school games, not only from Xbox, but like Sega stuff and Atari stuff, right? Some, they were on the arcade. PS3 and PS4, a lot of some PS2 games were on the, those online stores and stuff. But it was more of like you kind of had to have a PS2, because by the time the later half of the 7th gen, and obviously PS4, you cannot stick a PS2 disc in the console. So I would have to go and go to friends' houses and play the PS2 and experience it hands on, right? Even though we were already like into the 360 and PS3 era at the time, it was still fun, right? As a kid, you play whatever and it's fun, right? So I remember going to people's houses, and I remember playing games like Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2, and Need for Speed Underground 1 and Underground 2, and playing games like or seeing people, because my dad would not let me play, but seeing people play stuff like GTA San Andreas and Vice City, and I remember seeing stuff like Sly Cooper and Ratchet and Clank, and the Dragon Ball Z games. Oh my god, don't get me started on Dragon Ball Z, Budokai 3, Budokai Tenkaichi 3, and obviously, stuff like that. Just all that huge library games, just experiencing them, going to people's houses and playing them, and basically experiencing the PS2 that way. I was like, wow, this console, it's amazing. Like I remember as a kid, right? And I had a Wii, and I think by that time we already had a 360 because we got the 360 Slim in around 2011. So I think we had just gotten the 360 Slim, and stuff like that. But I remember being like, wow, the PS2 was like old school technology, but like a lot of those games are just as fun, if not even more fun than what I'm playing on Wii and on 360 and on like Nintendo DS. And it was one of those things where like, wow, okay, damn, this console, if it holds big boys with the HD consoles, is crazy. And then obviously later on I ended up getting a PS2. I want to say it was during the mid 2010s, like 2016ish, right? This was like the PS4 had already been out and stuff. Because I wanted to like be like, wow, okay, I want to experience that when I experienced as a kid going to people's houses and playing it, like, because I was way too little when this came out, and I was old enough to play games during the Wii and 360 era, and those were the consoles I grew up with. And yeah, and obviously, it was also a test where people were saying, oh, nostalgia, a lot of the games are not played as you remember them. A lot of them, they will, the expectations will fail you, and they will play worse than how you remember them. No, PS2 games, they play just as good as you remember them. Budokai Tenkaichi 3, Budokai 3, GTA San Andreas, the Need for Speed games, Ratchet and Clank, everything on PS2 plays now just as good as I remember playing it at other kids' houses when I was little. And that, to me, wow, that is amazing that a console can still hold the test of time. And I could say the same thing about Super Nintendo, but it's just, unfortunately for me, I didn't have that experience with the Super Nintendo. So I guess, it's not his fault that it takes away points from that, but it just is what it is, right? I had that with the PS2, and then obviously after owning one, or owning quite a few now, I have one that's modded, I have one that's vanilla, I have a slim one, I have a Japanese one for Japanese games, and I have quite a library up there of PS2 stuff. I can comfortably say and enjoy its library, and it probably has the greatest library of games of all time. It's only competition, I would say, like I mentioned, is the PS4, and the Super Nintendo, right? Obviously Steam, but I'm counting consoles only. I'm not counting like PC or anything, because wow, there is a game for everyone in that console. And but the amount that you see me praising this console, you would think is my favorite console of all time, but it's not. There's one console that I prefer over the PS2, and I think it's also just a testament to how good the sixth generation was, and how I said it in the GameCube segment, and I failed to mention it in the Dreamcast and Xbox segment, where I wish I grew up with that era. Because think about it, all those four consoles from that generation are in my top 10, and that tells you that generation was amazing. The Xbox is in my top 10, the GameCube, the Dreamcast, and the PS2 are in my top 10. And if you know him in real life, you know how much I praise the OG Xbox and the Dreamcast. And you would think, oh my god, this guy, like, his favorite console probably must be like the OG Xbox or something, or the Dreamcast or the GameCube. And it's like, nah, buddy, you haven't heard me talk about the PS2. I can talk about this console for hours. But yeah, other than that, I mean, I don't know. I feel like just keep ranting on, it'll probably just be like every other YouTuber saying the same stuff. But that's all I can say, man. Probably the greatest library of all time. If we're talking objectively, right, without my favoritism or my bias or whatever, I think this might be objectively the greatest console of all time. Like, if we're doing a top 10 list of like objective, how the console and the games were, this would 99.9% of the time be number one, and it'll be the greatest console of all time. How amazing this console is. But yeah, PS2 is my number two. So damn, what is my number one console? We'll find out. But before that, I will tell you my favorite console on the PS2 is As much as I want to say Budokai Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 3, it is not. It is Okami. And Okami is one of those games that they've been ported on newer consoles. So it's on PS4, it's on Switch, it's on Xbox One. So you don't have to go and hunt a PS2 and a copy of Okami. You can play that on the newer consoles. But yeah. Also another thing too, if you're a retro collector, right? Unlike the GameCube and the Dreamcast, this sold like crazy. It's the best selling console of all time, 160 million units. So that is good news for you and for me, because there is 160 million PS2s out in the wild, and they're super cheap on eBay or on thrift stores, or in a Goodwill. So you find them everywhere. So PS2s are in a abundance, so they're cheap, and PS2 games are also in abundance and super cheap. So unlike the Dreamcast and the GameCube that are unfortunately super expensive, this and the games are so cheap. So the entry barrier is very low, and you can enjoy PS2 even now if you've never played one, because the games are so cheap. But yeah, Okami, my favorite PS2 game. Number two, crazy number two. You know, they often say your favorite console of all time is the one you grew up with, or is the one you have the most nostalgia for, or is the one you have the most memories with. Whether those memories or that nostalgia is you growing up with the console from a childhood, or maybe it's a console you had during college when you were out in college and you played it, the dorms with your friends. Whatever it may be, right? Those are what a lot of people associate their favorite consoles with. And you've seen it in a bunch of top tens, right? You've seen people put the Genesis in their top one. You've seen the Super Nintendo, the PS1, the PS2, the NES, stuff like that, right? But for me, my favorite console is not the one I grew up with necessarily. It's also not the one I had the most memories of, like, staying up till 3 a.m. playing online. It's not any of that, right? My favorite console is a console that I always wanted. I always wanted when I was a little kid, right? I always wanted this console. Every time, and this was back during, like, before everything was on YouTube or Twitter or social media. So you had to get your news through magazines or commercials on TV, or any of the sort, demo discs, right? That's how you find out of stuff, right? And I remember scanning through magazines and demo discs and promotional videos and commercials, and seeing how this console, through those ads and stuff and the magazines, I was like, wow, dude, I really, really want that console. To a point where I remember, like, telling me, obviously as a kid, you can't physically do these stuff, but I was like, man, if I could, bro, I would trade every game I have, every console I have for this console, right? Those were my thoughts going through my head. And I remember when we got one console, right? This was all common sense. When we got one console, I remember being so like, oh man, why didn't we get the other console? Because of a situation where it was my brother's turn to pick the console we were getting, and he chose that console over the one I really wanted. Even though I remember I spent the whole like month prior convincing him, be like, yo, this console is better because these games are better, this and that and this and that and blah blah blah, and look at this and look at that, and all this cool stuff it can do, right? Even my dad, right? I even try to get my dad into this and be like, yo, you get this and that and this with this one, but not with this one. So there's a reason why we should get this one over this one. And I would, like, it's one of those things where you look, the grass is greener on the other side. And that's what it was with me, right? We had these consoles, and I would look at the grass on the other side of the fence, and it was greener. And damn right, it was greener. Because when I finally got old enough and made my own money and saved up and bought this console, and damn you, it was the greatest thing I've ever played. The smile instantly, right? I'm even smiling right now just speaking about it, is right. The library of the console, the games, the things that it can do, right? All the good stuff that comes with the console itself, with the way it does things. features and stuff like that, right? What it had over the competition, right? It's amazing comeback story, right? This console started off people being like, this thing is gonna die and it's dead in the water, and then they said, nope, we're gonna continue supporting it, we're gonna turn it around, we're gonna create amazing games. And it was the least attractive console of its generation towards the start, but by the end of that generation, it was the most attractive console of that generation, where it just turned it around. It became the least attractive console to the most attractive console. It outsold the competition, right? Where people had already called him, be like, "Oh, this other console's gonna win, and this one's dead." It said, "Nah, motherfucker," and he went Super Saiyan, and towards like the last episode, and just murked it. And yeah, I guess without further ado, my number one, my favorite console of all time. That console I'm speaking of is the PS3. I'm holding here the fat backwards compatible launch edition of the PS3, the 60 gigabyte one. But any PS3 regardless. I have a super slim, I have a slim, I have a Japanese white fat one. I have 280 gigabytes backwards compatible ones. I have this 60 gigabyte launch one. I have a modded one that's a slim. You know, yeah, it really is, and it's basically what I said. This console, it was, how do I say this right? Obviously, I guess mentioned multiple times, I grew up with the Wii 360, like that era, the PS3 era. But the console, my childhood console, was the Wii and the 360, right? And as you guys saw here, the 360 was lower on the list, and the Wii did not make the top 10. As much as I really like that console, and obviously, if I were to fall in the same spell of nostalgia like other people would, and they put their most nostalgic childhood consoles at number one, that list will look like this. The number two will be 360, and number one will be the Wii. But it's not, right? I'm not blinded by nostalgia. As much as amazing it is, right? I love Super Mario Galaxy and stuff. That console has its flaws, right? The 360 has its flaws that makes it not been any higher on this top 10 list. But but the PS3, when I finally got it, it was one of those things where it was like I said, right? There's the whole situation of, oh, the grass is greener on the other side, and then when you hop the fence and reach the other side, you realize it actually wasn't, or it's just the same. But in this case, it actually was greener on the other side, right? Coming from like the Wii and the 360 and those consoles with its flaws, I feel like those flaws were balanced, and they were like what I felt like I was missing with those consoles. It was fulfilled with the PS3, right? Obviously the Wii was like a weak console, so a weaker console. Sorry, and third party games were either non-existent or they were just horrible shovelware, right? And sure, you had the 360 to mitigate that, right? That's where I played the GTA games and the Dragon Ball games and the Sonic games on the 360 and stuff like that. But to me, consoles are those amazing third party games, multiplats, plus exclusives, right? Nintendo had the exclusives, but did not have the third parties. Xbox had the third parties, but did not have the exclusives. This console right here has both. It has the third parties and the exclusives, right? It has all the cool games that you want to play, like Call of Duty, Red Dead, GTA, the Dragon Ball games, the Sonic games, the Assassin's Creed games, just go on and on and on. Plus the exclusives, Twisted Metal, Last of Us, Uncharted, Little Big Planet, Ratchet and Clank, Sly Cooper, Motorstorm, Gran Turismo, blah 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 blah. Just go on and on. This literally had everything, and it's the reason why I wanted the console so much as a kid, right? I remember seeing a specific ad, and I think I still have this magazine somewhere in there. It's all colored in and stuff because as a little kid, you color everything that you see. I remember this magazine. It was like a Christmas holiday magazine, and it was the all the manufacturers of the consoles showing off what sales they had. The deals, right? The first page or the first section, it was like an overall like the games, like third party stuff, like from Ubisoft and Sega and EA, all that stuff. But then the Nintendo side, and it was showing off the DS and the DSi and all the games that were on sale. Then it was the Wii era, and I think Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Winter Games was like the game that I had just recently come out, and like New Super Mario Brothers Wii was on sale, and on the DS side it was like Mario and Luigi Bowser Inside Story, and I think Mario Galaxy 2 and stuff like that, right? Then the 360 side with like Call of Duty and Halo and blah blah blah, and then the PS3 side, right? It was the PS3 Slim, right? And it was the whole Kevin Butler, the now it's $299 ad, where the console was reduced in price to $299, and it showed a bunch of games. But there was a specific deal, I think, at the time, where if you got one, you get to choose between three games, and those three games, or it was two games, but my memory might be warped. I have to look at the magazine again. But one of them was Uncharted 2. No, it was three games. One of them was Uncharted 2, which looked amazing. Like I was like, oh my god, this game, it looks super cool. The other one was Ratchet and Clank, a Crack in Time. I want to say it was that one. It was the Ratchet and Clank, the one that it shows Ratchet's back. I mean, yeah, and Clank's face. I think it was a Crack in Time, because Tool Destruction is a different one. I want to say, it was the one that came out like 2009, 2010, and then it was Little Big Planet, Game of the Year edition, right? So it was those three games. So I think it was, the deal was, if you got a PS3 Slim, you get to choose one of those three games for free. And then I remember it was like, it caught my eye. I was like, whoa, this looks so cool. And then I would look into it, and those three games were amazing. So in my head, I'm like, and plus you had knowledge, right? I was old enough to understand, oh, Mario is Nintendo, Halo is, Xbox only. Like Mario's Nintendo only, Xbox is Halo only. And then I remember being like, oh, like Little Big Planet is like PlayStation only, or like Ratchet and Clank is PlayStation only, stuff like that. Like I had a basic idea of what was an exclusive to each title. And then obviously I had the idea that multiplies, like, oh, Grand Theft Auto it comes out obviously on both Xbox and PlayStation, or Call of Duty comes out on everything, or Sonic comes out on everything. So I had a grasp of what was exclusive and what was multiplayer. And yeah, and for some reason the fact that it had the first party games spoke to me more, and it just looked more interesting and more attractive, along with being able to play the third party games that the Wii can't. The PS3 always seemed more expressive, more attractive to me, right? And yeah, and it was the console I've always wanted to have. But then we ended up getting a 360, because I believe it was my brother had to choose that time, because I already earlier in the generation I had chosen the Wii, and then it was his turn, and then he chose the 360. And when I said that I was trying my hardest to convince, it was that I was trying my hardest to convince him and my dad as well, because I was like, man, I'm getting my dad involved in this. And so the PS3, and I remember being like, oh, it's free online, you get to play Call of Duty as well, just like on the Xbox, but it has like free online, it has like Ratchet and Uncharted and Little Big Planet and these exclusive games that like Xbox doesn't. I was just trying my hardest, right, to like I remember I even went to like AA batteries. I remember being like, Dad, you know how annoying it is buying AA batteries like every week, on like going to like a Walgreens to like at 11 p.m. because you're like missing AA batteries for like your TV remote. That happens on Xbox. Meanwhile on PS3, you don't need AA batteries to control it. You just charge it like you charge your phone. Like I remember going to every length of being why like PS3 was better than 360. But ultimately, it chose 360 because it was his decision. And obviously, like I said, I enjoyed the console. I mean, it was in my top 10 list, right? But it was always something missing. So then that was towards 2011, right? The later half of the generation. So then after that, I was like, yeah, I'm just gonna save up myself, right? I'm getting older. As a kid, obviously, you can only earn money fast enough, so you can it's not like you can go to a job and boom, get $300 real fast, and stuff like that. And I remember too, going on as the generation went on, I would see my brother struggle, with like the 360 stuff, like online memberships. I remember since they had to pay online memberships and the PS3 didn't. And as we're both kids and he's younger than me, he would try to scour every little change and penny and a dollar to be like, oh my god, I need to see if I can at least get like the 1 month Xbox Live membership to get And I remember he would count like the single dollar bills and like the quarters, and I'd be like, "Damn it, I'm missing like $3 or something like that." And in my head, I'd be like, or no, I even would tell him, I'd be like, "Online would have been free. We got a PS3, man." Just like little things like that. Or like I remember like when everybody was playing The Last of Us when it first came out. I remember being like, "We could have been playing The Last of Us. We got a PS3, man." Just like things like that, right? Like I remember being like, like I guess I was just butthurt about not getting it. But then obviously you grow older, you become a teenager, you go around and telling your parents, "Hey man, can I get like $5 if I like do the laundry or like do some like washing the dishes?" There's different ways to get money until I finally bought a PS3. Unfortunately, right, this is the unfortunate part. When that finally happened, it was already like I want to say 2015, 2016. 2015 sounds more about right, but maybe my memory is slightly warped. But I think it was 2015. I was already, this is already, we were well into the PS4, well into the Wii U. The Wii U was already getting axed, and we were into like going to the Switch with the whole Project NX. Went into like the PS4 and the Xbox One. And that's when I was able to muster enough money to get a PS3 Super Slim. And yeah, it was said I bought one, and like I said, when I finally played it and I played the games, the grass was greener on the other side, right? And but the unfortunate part is that I didn't get to play the console in its prime, so I didn't get to enjoy what other people were enjoying on its prime when a console is on its prime. So like games coming out, going to midnight releases, or getting the hype of a game when it's recently come out, playing it on peak hours online, right? Because let's say if I were to get on a game online in 2015, 2016 on a PS3, nobody's online playing that shit. Everybody's already moved on to like PS4. So I got to miss out on stuff like that. A lot of games, less specifically when it comes to like digital stuff, like whether it's games or servers or DLCs, a lot of them were delisted by them, so I couldn't even like enjoy stuff like that. For example, like there's a lot of stuff that I would love to experience, but I can't because by the time I got a PS3, either the servers of those games were shut down or those DLCs no longer exist. Like a lot of Little Big Planet DLCs, they didn't exist by then. Or not a lot, a lot did, but some, right? Or just other games, for example, like the Hot Shots Golf, the Sackboy and the Toro DLC, they were already long delisted by then. And you were still able to get them if you got the digital version of the game, which I ended up doing it because I really wanted to play as Sackboy and Toro on Hot Shots Golf. Mon Nation Racers, by that time the Sackboy Little Big Planet skin was gone, and I would never be able to enjoy that unless I like hack a console, the console or whatever. Just stuff like that. So those were some unfortunate parts of like being able to get the PS3 later on while everybody was already moved on to like PS4. But when it comes to the core games and what the console was still able to do, it still works as an amazing DVD player, Blu-ray player, CD player. You could load in your songs and listen to music, listen to watch videos and movies, whether it's streaming on like Netflix and Crunchyroll, or just grab a USB disc if you have a movie in it, pop it in and save it into the hard drive. Pictures, videos, music, movies, blah blah blah, etc. Printer settings, all the crazy printer settings that this has. You could literally print stuff like that. Themes, oh my god, like the background dynamic themes and all this stuff is just super cool. And not to mention the games. And like I mentioned before, the ability to play backwards compatible PS1 games on every model, right? I had at that time that my first PS3 was a Super Slim, so I can play the PS1 games as well. But then later on, when I eventually got this backwards compatible 60 gigabyte one, I was able to play PS2 games backwards compatible. And it's just the ultimate PlayStation, at least at the time. And even till now, like you could literally like if you want to be a minimalistic, all you have to do is just get a PS5 and get a fat backwards compatible launch model PS3, and you play the entire PlayStation library in just those two consoles, right? So there's that aspect as well. Obviously, I couldn't quite enjoy the free online or whatever, because by the time, like I said, when I got it, everybody moved on to PS4, and Sure, people were still playing online on PS3, but not enough to like actually enjoy it because there's no hype around anymore because the hype was the PS4 and stuff that came out at the time. I think Bloodborne was like hot at the time, and like whatever Call of Duty game was at the time or whatever. Destiny, I think, was big at that time when I got the PS3. You know, when everybody moved on to the PS4. But if we're talking first party games, um, this is by far Sony's most creative first party titles of all time. Like it's not even a question because they're backed. They were backed against the wall. Their back was, you know, they were in a corner and they had to be like, we have to create some of the greatest games ever if we want to beat the 360, and they ended up doing it. And my favorite library is the PS3 games. You got like creative stuff like Folklore and Puppeteer and the Motorstorm games, which are really fun, and Killzone and Resistance and Little Big Planet, and you know, obviously, you know, you got the Uncharted games, Ape Escape. You got stuff with the PS Move. You got stuff with you know, online, and just and this era there were still a lot of offline games as well. So games that, let's say, when the servers eventually die, you know, you can still enjoy those full games, right? It's not like during the PS4 era and the Xbox One, and you know, now with the PS5 and Series X, where every game needs to have a day one patch. A lot of these you could literally never connect this to the internet and still enjoy like 90% of his library. So that's another really cool part, right? So on top of those really cool things, you know, future proof stuff, the library was amazing, and it had the strongest, most unique, most creative first party library of any PlayStation console. On top of the amazing, great third party stuff, like I mentioned, the Dragon Ball Z games, the Call of Duty games, the Sonics, you know, GTA, GTA 4, GTA 5, Red Dead Redemption, blah blah blah. The peak Assassin's Creed games were on this console. Peak Call of Duty was during this console. And then, yeah, like I mentioned, not to mention, you know, the backwards compatibility stuff. And I can just go on and on and on and why this is like my favorite console of all time. And yeah, it's a story where it wasn't because I grew up with it, right? It wasn't because it was my first console ever. It was because it was, I really wanted it, and when I finally got it, the grass was greener on the other side. But yeah, other than that, let me know what you guys think. How was this top 10 list? I know this style of videos I don't do much. And let's see if you guys want to hear my top 10 games of all time. If you want to hear my top 10 or rank the Nintendo consoles, or what are my least favorite consoles, you know, whatever, you know, the case may be, let me know what type of videos you guys like to see. And yeah, my favorite game, before we go, my favorite game on my favorite console of all time is Little Big Planet. Any of them. Little Big Planet 1, Little Big Planet 2, Little Big Planet 3, Little Big Planet Karting, Little Big Planet Sackboy's Prehistoric Moves. Any of them, it doesn't matter. Any of those Little Big Planet games are my favorite on the PS3. But yeah, what do you guys think about the PS3? Do you guys like it? You guys hate it? What are your favorite consoles? Is your favorite console the one you grew up with? Let me know. You guys like, if you guys think I deserve it, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. That will greatly help me in my YouTube channel. Peace out, guys.